In this segment, we're going to be taking a look at the internment of the Japanese Americans during World War II. We've already learned that specific groups are often the object of hatred and prejudice. They face an increased risk of discrimination during wartime. I said that when I was making a reference to Germany and the Holocaust, but it also applies right here in the United States. How were the Americans of Japanese descent treated by the United States after we entered World War II? We find in America, as well as around the world, that prejudice, when coupled with wartime fears, can affect the civil liberties of minorities, even in the United States. The word internment refers to the relocation of the Japanese Americans to essentially concentration camps in the United States desert. Why were these people interned? Well, there was very strong anti-Japanese prejudice, especially along the West Coast, where the concentration of Japanese Americans happened to be. There were false beliefs that the Japanese Americans were aiding the enemy, that they were spy rings where they would try to help out the Japanese Empire. And there was a great deal of anti-Japanese propaganda. The internment of the Japanese Americans to these, as they were relocated to these internment camps, they were often forced to sell their own property, to sell their stores, to sell their homes, to sell what goods they had. They were only allowed to take what they could carry. Then they were to move to these guarded areas, which were essentially camps that were fenced in with barbed wire in guarded areas so that they could be watched. And as you can see from the image that's right above me, this was the grocery store of an American citizen, just of Japanese descent. And he posted proudly, "I am an American," yet he had to sell. Do you suppose the Japanese Americans received fair market value for their products, for their goods, for their homes? Probably not. The internment of these Japanese Americans affected primarily the populations along the West Coast. Again, that's where the largest concentration of Japanese Americans happened to be. Their liberties were severely limited while they lived in these camps. Camps were little more than prisons, and as you can see from this image, this was actually a horse stall that was transformed into living quarters for an individual, for an entire family. One would think that the Supreme Court would step in and safeguard the liberties of American citizens. After all, these are not aliens. These are not people from Japan. These are American citizens. Where is the Supreme Court during all this? Well, the Supreme Court upheld the government's right to act against the Japanese Americans who lived on the West Coast of the United States. Again, citing the fear and citing the potential that they could aid the enemy. This happened twice. There were two Supreme Court cases. In each one, the U.S. Supreme Court said that the U.S. government was completely justified. Time will tell us, though, that it was not justified. A public apology was eventually issued by the United States government. Even a financial payment was made to the survivors of this episode in American history. However, as we went through and investigated, not a single plan of espionage was discovered during the entire war. This incident in America's history goes to prove that anywhere in the world, minority groups who traditionally suffer discrimination face an increased risk during times of war, and increased prejudice can lead to severe human consequences.